all here, all here to learn about enhanced outreach to connect students with basic needs resources. So we are thrilled you are here. My name is Amy Magasos. I'm Associate Director of Strategy and Partnerships at the Washington Student Achievement Council, and I will be your host and guide today for our training. We'll call it a workshop, very interactive. And I'd like to take a moment to really offer special thanks to a few of our particular participants today. So first, I want to thank Deshawn Carr, who is here from Education Northwest. Education Northwest partners have been integral in this work throughout last year in our collaboration. And Deshawn, I see you're here. If you'd like to come off mute and say hello, just want to thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Amy, for just hosting this workshop. My name's Deshawn Karn with Education Northwest, and it was a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with WASAC on these tools, and hopefully they can help strengthen the basic needs space. Just big shout out to WASAC and for all the colleges who are part of the pilot and helping to get these tools together for everyone to use.
Thank you, Deshawn. So glad that we have been able to collaborate. I'd also like to thank our partners, State Board for Community Technical Colleges. Jennifer Dellinger was an important partner in the planning of this work. She can't be here today unexpectedly, so in absentia, thanks to Jennifer, and I know that we'll have a State Board rep with Dylan Jelick, who will be here today. And finally, I want to give a special thanks to all of the participants from different campuses who were part of the benefits promotion pilot last year. And we'll talk about that a bit more. But shout out to you all who are here today to engage in this work. Finally, thanks to Kim Rudder from WASAC, who will be our Zoom co-pilot today. We'd be in big trouble if we didn't have some technical help. So thanks so much, Kim. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. We're going to be here together today, engaging in lots of different ways. So it'd be great if you would share your name, your role, and your campus or institution. And that will give us a chance to get to know who's in the room. All right. Let's go to the next slide and let's get going. So in today's workshop, here's what we're up to. By the end of the day, you will have a good understanding of the role of effective outreach to really bridge that gap between students reporting basic needs and security and those that are using available resources, which right now is only a small percentage. We want everyone to be able to gain insight on outreach from key resources from the last year's benefits promotion pilot. And go ahead and click. Um, so this is we got some animation here. So Kim, if you'd click, right? And then learn the third aim for today is to really learn about the strategies in the Enhancing Outreach Toolkit, which you'll receive a link for, and we'll be working quite a bit with that tool. We'll also explore the tools and develop a cycle of enhanced outreach, thinking about it for your campus. And really, we want today to be a chance for you to be able to begin developing your planning around a basic needs outreach plan and identify some next steps for your campus. So that's our plan for today. I do want to say that really to meet these goals, it's really intended as a learning workshop today. It'll be interactive throughout and really friendly and dynamic. So with the wide variety of campuses and organizations here today, we want to tap into your experiences and perspectives in a variety of ways. So you're going to see surveying and asking you to add your ideas to the chat. There's going to be discussion questions where I'm going to ask you to unmute and share your questions or experiences. You're going to have a chance to take your own notes and have some individual thinking about how this applies to your campus. And we'll have some small group breakouts as well. So get ready to get active. That's going to be true throughout our work today. All right, next slide, please. So here's our roadmap, and thanks for going ahead to click through so folks can see the whole picture here. So in the first section of our workshop today, we're going to create a foundation. We're going to explore why basic needs outreach and what we mean by enhanced or targeted outreach. We're also going to explore the learning from the enhanced outreach last year in the benefits promotion pilot. So you'll have a chance to gather some of the lessons from that pilot that your fellow campuses in Washington were able to participate in. In the second section, um, so go ahead and click. We'll dive into the how-to part of the workshop. So we're going to explore the 5 steps for enhanced outreach, including examples and tools that were informed by the pilot last year. And in the third section, you'll consider how your campus might apply some of these steps and create a plan. And we'll also talk about some of the support and opportunities to help you with your planning. I'd like to ask you to take a moment to download a worksheet. This worksheet is in Google Docs and it provides you the agenda for today with room for notes on page 1. And on page 2, that'll be about kind of applying the lessons and the steps of the toolkit to your campus. So it'll be the beginnings of a plan or preparation for a plan that you can use on page 2. So take a moment, see if you can download that. You don't have to use this, but I'll be referencing it throughout today's time, and so this will be an opportunity for you to keep it all in one spot. All right, so it's time for some engagement. I'd like to get a sense of the outreach strategies that you're currently using on your campus and how this fits into your broader picture of strategic planning for basic needs. So Kim, if you would be willing to launch our first survey. So you're going to see a Zoom poll pop up with 2 questions. So if you take a moment once that's launched, which I think Kim will be able to help us with in launching, and answer the questions, and then we'll all get a sense of what some of the practices are in your, across Washington. So take a moment, reply to 2 questions. So the first question's kind of long, and it's a click all of the options, multiple choice. And if you're not sure, there's always the last option, which is, I'm not sure, and that's okay too. If you're just joining, welcome. We are doing a survey right now that you should see popping up about current outreach strategies on your campuses. And we've got about a little over half of folks who have participated. Going to give it another 30 seconds. You can answer the poll and then we'll show it so you can kind of get a sense of what your colleagues are doing around the state. Okay, great. Let's end the poll. And it's okay if you didn't get a chance to respond, but I think it'll give us a picture of what this looks like. We're going to share results. Can you give me a thumbs up if you're able to see the results of the poll? Awesome. Okay, great. So take a look here. What are campuses doing to currently outreach to students? It looks like number one, that there's lots of varieties of ways people are outreaching to students to connect them to uh, resources. I don't see anyone who said that their campus isn't outreaching to students or that they're not sure. That's great news. I'm seeing a lot of information is showing up on websites, posters, staffing tables on campus. I see email messages are strong. Classroom presentation seems to be a common approach. So fantastic. That's great news. Outreach is alive and well across our campuses. That's really, really great. Let's take a look at the second question. This is about whether in your campus strategic plan, if outreach about basic needs is there, is it currently included? And it looks like we have, about half who say that yes, a portion say no, and some folks aren't sure. So that's good to know too, because if we think about outreach, sustainability over time, having it be part of strategic planning is something we might want to take into account. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and we are going to go on to our next slide. So let's start with the big challenge in our state. So from our 2024 state survey about basic needs and security among students, we know that over half of Washington students reported experiencing food and or housing insecurity or homelessness, as well as other aspects of basic needs and security. And your campuses are all actively engaged in addressing these challenges in a variety of ways through programs, partnerships, campus strategic planning, connecting students to benefits. You are on it. You are very actively involved in this work. But I want to point to some data that came from this survey that's really confounding. Students in 2024 um, really shared this important information. Among those experiencing food and housing insecurity, only about half are using public benefits and or campus and community resources. So that is really the heart of what we're about today. Next slide, please. So why is it? What is holding students back according to the survey data? Why aren't they using resources? So from the survey, students
Mhm.
reported that barriers included students' belief that they were ineligible. And note that I say belief that they were ineligible, not actual eligibility. Um, they weren't aware, or they're really unsure about how to access the resources. So what I want to emphasize here is that there's a lot of room to grow in proactively making students aware and connecting them to existing resources. It's really an important part of the puzzle of increasing students' basic need stability and resources. So that is the heart of the work that we're doing today. Um, let's go to the next slide. You have come to this workshop today around enhanced outreach. So what do we mean by enhanced outreach and how is it different from other kinds of outreach? So let's talk about that. So strategic communication approaches is what enhanced outreach is about. Using students' name, identity, or needs to be able to send tailored messages through channels like text, email, or learning management systems like Canvas. So this is really contrasted with broad outreach or mass messaging in important ways. So really the strategies in this approach are about increasing personalization and relevance and really the connection to the student, and then customizing for key populations with high needs. So I'm going to ask you to reply in the chat to a couple of questions. One is, at your campus, which student populations are especially impacted by basic needs and security? And I want to ask you that question that we were just looking at about what might be some of the barriers that your students have to learning about and accessing resources. So let's just take a minute here and think about this. Are all students the same in being impacted by basic needs and security? And why aren't they accessing um, current existing resources? What are your thoughts about that? Jean says TANF students. Michaela, parenting older students, English language learners, rural students, low income students I see, military connected students, students of color, international students. Excellent. Okay, now some of the barriers. Stigma, that's important. I see more groups that are disproportionately impacted, first generation, passport students or former foster students, high school completion programs. Great. Other thoughts about the barriers students are having in accessing resources? Lack of recognition that their insecurity is bad enough. That's an interesting one. It's kind of like realizing that there are resources. I think it's maybe connected also with the stigma. Justice impacted reentry is another group. Overload and overwhelm. That is very related to what we're going to be talking about today from Kelly. Thanks. Rachel says they feel guilty for asking. So that normalization of it is a challenge that we have. Spread thin with work and responsibilities, absolutely. And then that piece about thinking they aren't eligible. Fantastic. Thanks so much for this. So, as we think about enhanced outreach and targeted populations, these may be some of the student populations we could consider as a focus of these strategies. And connecting them to resources. And some of the insights that you're talking about here on the barriers of not being aware, not feeling like it's bad enough, being overwhelmed, these are some of the aspects that the strategies we'll talk about today are intended to address. Okay, next slide, please. So, what are some examples of enhanced outreach? Really, we want to be able to think about enhanced outreach being customized and personalized. So some of the ways that that could come through in an actual strategy would be those kinds of emails that begin with a student's name and we're able to focus on certain student populations like those that you just listed. Text messaging with a focus on those student populations who may be furthest from accessing resources, and targeted messages to certain populations, perhaps in Canvas. So notice that a lot of these enhanced outreach strategies are digital because they allow us the opportunity to focus in on populations that are most facing the barriers or who most may be facing basic needs and security. So another kind of approach that we saw in the survey is what we would term as broad outreach or mass messaging or mass outreach. So within that, um, we have email messages to all students, posters that all students can see, general tabling. So, making sure that there's a chance for folks to come up to a table and talk to staff that anyone can access. Canvas messaging or that LMS kind of system messaging to all students. So that's kind of broad outreach to make sure everybody knows. What I want to emphasize here, and I'll say it many times, is both types are valuable. But it's very common, and we saw that in the survey we just did, to focus on the broad outreach. And what we're going to be talking about today is how to do these enhanced strategies. So let's see. Um, let's I'd like to know a little bit about your enhanced outreach use. So we're going to have survey 2 be launched. And Kim, if you could help us with that, that would be great. So you're going to see another poll pop up. So at your campus, um, are any enhanced outreach strategies, like the one on the screen, being used to connect students with basic needs resources? And we tried to kind of bring some nuance to that. So no, we're not using them, but maybe we're beginning to use them, or we're all over it. We're fully using these kinds of strategies to reach the hard to reach populations who may be most impacted. And then you may also be unsure, and that's okay too. So let's see, we've got about 29 who have responded to the poll. Can I have a few more people respond? Okay. I think I think we're good. All right, let's end the poll and share the results. All right. As you can see here, we've got a few who it's new to them. They aren't using these strategies. The majority of people are in the beginning stages. So that's great. This is really going to be an opportunity today to dive into how to deepen that and build in sustainability for that. And then we see a few that are all over it. This is part of the way they do business. So that's fantastic. Okay, again, both types of outreach are important. And enhanced outreach really aims for populations most in need and who may have particular barriers to research to accessing the resources. All right. Next, we're going to talk about some of the learning from the post-secondary benefits promotion pilot from last year. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. All right. So last year, WASAC, together with Education Northwest, um, launched the benefits promotion pilot. It really provided Washington colleges with this opportunity to strategize and develop solutions to reach students and ensure that they have access to resources to support their post-secondary success. And really, it taught us so much about the strategies that are in the enhanced outreach toolkit that we're going to be diving into today. So one of the first things we learned from the process of the pilot last year is that among students with the maximum Washington College grant, about 79% are not receiving DSHS administered benefits. So that is an interesting and maybe surprising thing that we learned as we were testing a new way to identify students who are likely income eligible for DSHS benefits like SNAP. And it gave us a chance with those colleges to test the enhanced outreach strategies and learn how to strengthen impact of outreach. And I'm putting into the chat a brief that you may have checked out before, but I just want to make it handy. It's some of the key lessons from the pilot, and we'll be talking about those briefly. All right, next slide. So in last year's pilot, 15 colleges used data and enhanced outreach strategies and campaigns to connect students with benefits. And the way this worked was that WASAC's list of maximum Washington College grant recipients was matched by Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS. And DSHS kind of matched that data and told us who was not in their system to receive benefits. Then WASAC gave those lists to WASAC, or to each campus that was participating that you see on the right there. That was an elaborate process for students to receive that involved a data sharing agreement. So kudos to the campuses for going through that data sharing process. This was not essential for the enhanced outreach to have this matched data of likely income eligible students not receiving benefits, but it provided that target population for the work of the pilot. Campus is then designed and launched their outreach campaigns during last year to encourage students to apply for benefits and offered support and other resources that weren't benefits. On top of that, we held a quarterly learning community for campuses to come together, talk about the campaigns they were developing, the challenges they were facing, and we had the benefit of Education Northwest that engaged the colleges as well in surveys and focus groups to be able to understand the campus level perceptions, strategies, all the limitations for doing this work. And I just want to emphasize and offer a real kudos and hats off to these colleges. The work that they did, they had a couple of examples of how to message for these purposes, but they were really inventing and experimenting throughout how to do this. And they didn't have a toolkit. They were experimenting, sharing with each other, and really great work that has now shaped the toolkit that we're offering to you today. So we're going to look into 5 key learnings that came from this pilot. And it's really formed the basis of the toolkit that we talk about today. All right, next slide for us. Let's talk about the lessons. So the first lesson is that staff on these pilot teams were really appreciative about having data about their income eligible students who were not accessing or utilizing benefits. So this population became the target student population for these outreach campaigns that each campus did. And the goal was to get more of these students to apply for benefits and learn about other campus or community resources, especially with the navigators on campus. I just want to point out here that the focus of the pilot was likely income eligible students not receiving benefits, but other student populations could be the focus of targeted outreach as well. So you'll hear me saying that over and over again. This is just one way of focusing in on a certain student population. Next slide, please. So another thing we learned is that campus teams really did a great job developing a variety of outreach campaigns. They used email with a target to these students and did a great job kind of sussing out what the benefits and challenges were of that approach. Some of them used text, sometimes as their main strategy, sometimes in conjunction together with emails. And some used their Canvas or learning management system messaging to target student groups. That was probably the least used. Based on this testing that they did, we were able to pull out some of the benefits and challenges that you see here. And just want to emphasize that this is available as a chart in the key lessons document that Ed Northwest and Wasak put together about the pilot. You'll see it on page 6. So if it's hard to see on the screen, you've got this other place where you can access that. All right, next slide. Third lesson. We learned a lot about the technological and communications infrastructure. It's really central to using enhanced outreach. So the pilot, I would say, showed us the need to strengthen the systems that support both student outreach and basic needs service delivery, particularly the kinds of tools that allow staff to integrate communication, tracking of the communication, and also the support students receive. So there's a lot more work to do on this front. But I would just say that colleges worked really hard last year with their tech systems, such as Salesforce and Navigate, and use them for their outreach efforts. And that's an area where it really helps to have a larger team of experts on your campus. So we'll talk about that as well. Um, Campuses really worked hard to adapt and learn from these systems that weren't set up for basic needs in many cases for our purposes in advancing basic needs connection for students. But they did a lot of work making that work, tailoring the language, figuring out the platform, figuring out the timing and the tone. So really what I would highlight here is that cross teamwork is really important within a campus. So uh, the basic needs team is the one, they have been the leaders in this work, but their ability to connect with communications staff on their campus and research teams on their campus has been really important. All right, next slide. Key lesson number 4 is that creativity and adaptation are important. You can create a plan, but adapting is especially essential. And we saw pilot colleges run into various challenges with both outreach and serving the students that were outreach to and said, I'm raising my hand. I'd like to connect to benefits, help. Um, these campuses really responded creatively, and you can see that in the example of Spokane Falls on the slide there. For some colleges, it was figuring out how to use their tech platform. Maybe the basic needs team had less access to that in the past or less training. And for others, it was really figuring out how to meet the higher level of interest in need in basic needs services and navigation. So lessons on this one, it's really important to both plan the outreach and also plan new ways to serve a higher volume of students whom you've outreach to. And some of the key strategies that we learned were having that flexible staffing so that you have ways to meet the need as you outreach to more students, collaborating across systems and partnerships too to sustain the outreach and support, even when there's staffing challenges, which I know is common for most colleges. All right, next slide. Last learning I want to point to is that uh, data on outreach campaigns is really important. It helps to gauge the impact of the enhanced outreach and identify which students were receiving the outreach and who benefited. So these are some of the questions that are really important for campuses to be able to answer and that we're going to talk about strategies today to help with. But if we're running an outreach campaign, we need to be able to know, did students receive the message? Did they open it? Did students click on a link to apply for benefits or to get help at their campus level? And did the hard to reach group, some of the ones that you put in the chat just a little bit ago, did they engage with the message? And is there anything that can be adjusted, especially so you're reaching those student groups that are hard to reach? And the data should be able to help us to know who they are and to know where we should focus our adjustments so that we can improve over time. So these are some of the questions that we should be able to get from the data from our outreach. So that's part of what we're going to be looking at today. We have one more slide that kind of summarizes some pieces of this. From the pilot, we really learned that enhanced outreach strategies could help connect students to resources. We're working on data to be able to examine that more specifically. We're not quite there yet on the WASAC side. But we saw that there are some areas to focus on in order to really enhance our marketing and outreach. So first is creating more cross-unit collaboration. That'll give basic needs teams more bandwidth and tools for outreach. Making sure that there's technology that basic needs teams can use to help them manage the outreach and resulting demand from students. Third is it continues to be important on campuses and across campuses to experiment and share um, so that we're continuing to learn from each other. And finally, it's really important, and we'll spend a lot of time on this today, to be able to evaluate our impact and refine the outreach strategies based on what we learn about the impact so that we can keep improving. There isn't a magic book on the perfect way to do outreach to get to the hard to reach students, especially those most impacted. So we need to kind of keep iterating and improving, and data can help us do that. All right. Um, we have a third survey that we are going to ask you to do. And it has a few questions. It's 3 questions, and it's about your current practices connected to these opportunities. So it is now launched. The first question is, does your team currently work with communications for outreach campaigns? There's an open answer one that is what tech you use. The third is, does your team currently work with institutional research to understand which student groups you're outreaching to and how they're responding? And I'm going to ask one final question after you do this. So let's start with these. And I'm going to add the questions to the chat as well. If for some reason you're not able to access the survey, you could also put it in the chat. And we'll give it a moment for everyone to reply to the survey. We're currently at about 17 of 45. Okay, thank you for replying. Let's end the poll. If you didn't get a chance to reply to the poll, you can put your comment in the chat. Let's take a look at this. So the first question is around connecting with campus communication staff. And it looks like we've got a good proportion of respondents who are working together a little or some, and others who are working together a lot, about 5. Some who aren't quite sure. So that's kind of a good sense of this. And a proportion, maybe a third, say that no, they're not working together. And let's see, are we able to view details? Oops, it looks like it's going to be difficult to view details um, on the what tech is used. So I'm going to ask folks if you could just put in the chat really quickly the tech that your campus is using to manage outreach, if you're using any. So go ahead and add that to the chat just for a sense of it. And let's go on to the third one. Does your basic needs staff currently work with institutional effectiveness or research staff to understand the demographics of students you're reaching and serving? And we've got a breakdown of maybe a third to a half who say no, they're not working together. The majority are working together a little or some. And then we've got some who say, just like a couple who say we work together a lot. And then, of course, some who aren't sure, and that's fine too. This may be a new area. Great. Thank you so much for replying to this. What it shows me is that this idea of basic needs teams working together with communications teams and basic needs working with research is there's room to grow on that. I'm seeing a lot of folks put in together what their tech tools are. Notice the variety. Um, we are a decentralized state in Washington across our campuses, but there's a big variety there. So we see EAB Navigate, it's a common one. We see Slate for student success. That's one I haven't seen before among our pilot colleges. Outlook for direct email. Okay, big variety there. Thanks so much. Um, so I'd like to just pause here. We've got some time. We've laid a bunch of information um, around the pilot learnings. I'd like to open it up for questions that you may have and reflections or key learning that any of the folks from last year's pilot would like to share. So we've got, I don't know, another 5 to 8 minutes. Would love to hear from you. Either raise your hand or you could put a response in the chat. So reflections from last year's pilot participants or questions that folks have who are new to this. I just want to say welcome if you are just joining. I see a couple folks just joining. And I also want to share, in case it's helpful to anyone, we have a PDF of all the slides for today. Sometimes it's helpful to have a local version. Okay, anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, all right, no problem. Do add questions to the chat along the way. So if you have thoughts or questions and I miss it, raise your hand or just unmute and say, hey, Amy, hold on a second. Great. So we're heading into um, looking at um, the toolkit that is based on the pilot that we've described. And I'm going to preface it, and then we're going to take a break. And when we come back in a little bit, we will have a chance to dive into it more deeply. So let's go into the next
So
slide.
thought I'd do a
Oh,
real quick video on this P0011 code. That's for camshaft position timing.
all right. So this is an overview of the 5 steps for enhanced outreach of the toolkit that Ed Northwest and WASAC developed. And I'm going to provide a brief overview and then we'll take a break. So in the 5 steps, no surprise, we have to start by saying, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are our goals? And part of that is determining who we want to reach, why, how we're going to reach them, and what do we want to be able to, how are we going to do that? So it's a bit of the planning, and we'll talk about some of the resources that will help determine what the plan is. I think it's really important to emphasize that campuses will have different goals. Some campuses may want to focus on particular student populations that are hard to reach, that are different from other campuses. And some are going to use different platforms or enhanced outreach digital tools to do that, and that's totally okay. Um, the second step is around identifying the platform. We've seen the variety that are there, and I want to emphasize that your communications team are going to be part of figuring out the right platform to use so that you can get the data you need. We'll talk quite a bit about designing messages, and we have some great examples. We didn't have many examples when we did last year's pilot, but thanks to the great work of our pilot campuses, we now have a model that can be helpful for you in designing your messages. And then, of course, you'll adapt it. But copying and starting with a model really helps make this go more smoothly and moves you along a little faster. The fourth area we'll talk about is determining outreach frequency and timing. And you may be surprised around the frequency best practices. So that'll be good to talk about and consider together. And then the last piece that we're going to spend a good amount of time on is around analyzing the outcomes of your campaigns for outreach and understanding the impact. And that, of course, can lead to the ways that you adapt, refine, and iterate your messaging and your plan overall. And that creates the kind of continuous improvement cycle that you see there on the right. So in the next section, we're going to go through each step. You'll have a chance to begin applying these ideas to your own campus planning. And we're going to take a little break. So let's take a 10-minute break, come back at 10 o'clock, and we will be ready to go to dive into the overview. And in the meantime, if you have any chat questions or comments, please add them to the chat. But let's go to the next slide. And I know it says welcome back, but let's go and take a 10-minute break, and I'll see you back here at 10 o'clock. And let's pause the recording. So let's go to an example. And this is an example that I'm showing on the screen, but you can also find it on page 3 of the toolkit doc. And I'm going to keep referencing pages within the toolkit because sometimes it's easier for folks to see kind of on their local version versus the screen. So let's go to the next slide here. So let's check out this example of a messaging campaign. And this is a fictional example, but it's based on a lot of the ideas that the pilot talked about. We're going to use it as we talk about the 5 steps of enhanced outreach. So I have a couple questions for you, and I want you to reply in the chat. So take a look at this message with 2 questions in mind. Who is the target audience? See if you can discern that. And what's the intended outcome of this message? Or what is the message asking students to do? So go ahead and read through it and put your responses in the chat. Jesse says, individual students, benefit meeting or benefit fair attendance. Great. So that's what we're trying to get them to do. Audience is people managing work, family, school. We have the audience is students with kids. That's interesting. Krista says general outreach to all students. And the message is attending the resource fair. Students belong at the campus, being a key message. The action is come see us. Students with children, non-traditional, or all students connecting to resources, says Gina. Okay. Working parents, students, and the action is to come to the fair, schedule an appointment. Okay. That's great. Let me ask the question, how do you know? What are the clues of the likely student group that's targeted here? How could you tell that it was working students and parenting students? What is it in the message that makes you think that's it? Ah, the image, the language, says Gina. Madeline says supporting family would be the key words. Anton says the opening paragraph. Several references to family, says Josephine. Great. Excellent. Love it. So yes, indeed, parenting students are the targeted group here, but is it exclusive to them? Would this only work for them? What do you think? Anton says, no, not exclusive. So it has some key aspects, but it's open for all to attend. And I would guess a lot of students feel that they're stretched thin. So that's going to reach a lot of students, not just parenting students. But there are key aspects that help you identify the target population. Excellent. Great exploration of this example. We are going to be returning to this example for a few different things. So excellent kind of analysis of this. Let's go on to the next slide. We're going to talk about the first step, which is defining the goals of the campaign. And I'd say a piece of this is the goals of the campaign, and it's going to point to who the team needs to be on the campaign as well. And so this is on page 2, the planning worksheet first step. So you'll see it there if you want to take some notes. So the very first step, we have to know, what we're trying to accomplish. And that is the first step. It's really who's our target audience. And it doesn't mean exclusively, but we want to be able to think clearly about the student populations that are facing disproportionately high basic needs insecurity. So how might we know which populations are experiencing basic needs insecurity at high rates? You listed several when we started this training, students who really face those challenges at high rates. But how do you know that? Let me just ask that question because I shared with you the state rates overall from the survey in 2024, but how would you know at your campus? Ah, Karen says, our IR people track these things. That's right. They have the data on the basic needs survey, but there might be more. If you're part of a community and technical colleges, there is now a dashboard to understand it, not at the campus level, but at the regional level. So that's a very helpful thing to help you know, even at the, among a couple of colleges, what does that look like? Maybe some of you didn't participate in the overall survey that in 2024 was of public colleges. What might be some other ways you could identify students who would be good focus populations? Rebecca says when students come to meet with us, they fill out intake forms. They ask them to identify themselves and their concerns and struggles. They're filling out emergency aid. They also have a chance to list what they identify as their race and ethnicity. So that might give some insight from those forms when you look at it in aggregate. Demetra says financial aid data. Excellent. That's a really important resource there that we often aren't thinking about quite as much. We might also be learning about populations that are especially impacted through, as Odessa says, talking to students. So tabling and finding out just on a more anecdotal level, which populations of students are especially impacted. Yeah, and Shannon, financial aid knows if students use disability or income benefits as income sources. So that can be an important um, area to understand the populations. And the other piece, of course, is who's at a low use of resources. That's another aspect of this. So if there are student groups that really aren't using your navigation services, if you track that, that's a great way to focus. All right. Second here is what's our intended outcome of enhanced outreach? So what are you trying to get students to do if to act on this messaging? So some examples are here on the screen. So maybe we want them to apply for benefits or childcare subsidies. Maybe we want to encourage them to connect with staff or visit the Campus Resource Center. Maybe you want them to go to a resource fair. It can be any action that you'd like them to take. But defining that ahead of time is helpful. And that connects to the why. So in the big picture, why is this important? Um, identifying your why for outreach will really help you connect it to the strategic priorities for your college, and it'll serve as a kind of North Star for your planning. And you can check back and say, this is why we were doing this. Did we accomplish this? Do we see any changes? So an example of that might be increased retention rates for particular groups because they have the resources that they need to persist. This identification of your why can also help you connect and explain this and engage other campus partners and leadership at your campus about how this work of basic needs, resources, and outreach connects to their priorities of retention and student success. All right, last part is how. How will we accomplish this goal? And this is really, the idea is a simplified statement describing your campaign strategy. And we'll be talking in more detail about the how, but being able to articulate that in your plan, again, helps you communicate it well to some of your partners. So what is your student group focus? What are you trying to get the students to do? When you'll run the campaign and what your tools will be. And there's a couple of examples there. Any questions about this? All right, I'm going to ask you to go to your planning worksheet that you've downloaded. And I want to note at that top part of page 2, jot down some of your initial ideas about the who, what, and why of a campaign goal at your campus. Add them to that center column there on your notes and ideas for your campus. And as you think about that, you might consider in the last column, who ought to be on your planning team? Who should you be asking about or consulting with on this, creating this kind of a plan? If you'd like, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this, on your initial ideas about what some goals might be at your campus. Love to hear it in the chat, or if you are brave and are sick of being muted and want to speak, love to hear your thoughts verbally about what might be some initial goals at your campus for the who, what, why. I'm going to give it a moment if you want to reflect individually and if you want to add to the chat or raise your hand and unmute. All right, Madeline. So the goal might be increase enrollment in resources and support services and reduce crisis intervention needs because enrollment happens earlier. Love that. Proactive approaches. Excellent. And Madeline, you might think about which would be the targeted populations, not limited to them, but who might be the targeted populations you think are particularly important for this goal that you've named? Kelly says, start next quarter, develop more systematic contact with those seeking funding. Oh, interesting. So using the start next quarter screener tool that CTCs have and develop a plan around contacting those because you know they're seeking funding. They may be the ones that especially need support in accessing it. All right, great. Would anyone like to share their thinking on this, or if you have a question around defining the goals? Everyone is so quiet on this Friday. I know a few of you may have engaged in this kind of targeted outreach in the past. Um, so curious if anyone wants to share what focus areas they've had in the past. Is anyone considering parenting students as a focus population? And noting Madeline's comment around low income students being a focus. So maybe Pell eligible or Washington College grant eligible. That's a great focus area.
I'll unmute and talk. I
Awesome.
think our entire campus pretty much is Pell recipients. So definitely a high population there. Also a really high population of first gen students, which I think is pretty common in SBCTC schools. So also trying to get resources to students that are like helping with how to college a little bit too. Just because you might not know you're eligible for resources if your family wasn't on it, and you also might not know what college resources exist if your family never went, so you don't have anyone to like talk to about it.
Love that. Thank you. Anybody else want to jump off mute and speak?
Yeah, this is Annie at Peninsula College, and I think that sometimes, and this is just my own perspective, we have different groups doing different things, and I really like how you're saying, getting everyone on the same page to do that nudge campaign. Um, Sometimes I think that collectively different departments hold on to different aspects of it, but I really hope that all colleges can come together and work together as teams instead of being so segregated on campuses. Like we have work first education or workforce education here. We also have our outreach team that manages doing outreach to the general publication. And then we also have marketing. So, trying to get all three groups basically to focus together. And unfortunately, I'm not on any of those groups. I work with Trio, so I'm a little bit different. So I have my own marketing campaigns. But I think getting everyone to come to the same table, I think is crucial when you're doing these kinds of nudges or outreach and not having that actual ownership independently for different departments that, make it more where everyone's at the table.
Annie, I love what you just said. And I think that we saw in the pilot, that is one of the big challenges. And I think we see it across the arenas of basic needs work, of like figuring out how teams can work together in a more unified way around the outreach strategies. And I think that you have put your finger on it. Sometimes those who are working to connect students with resources may not have the connections yet with other teams and colleagues and the broader plan. So really great points, Annie. And I'm going to pass it to Gina.
Hi there. I was just kind of thinking, well, reflecting on the benefits pilot and how we're doing outreach for SNAP benefits and then trying to figure out, like trying to wrap my head around, okay, a future outreach plan, right? And so it seems like the first year students, most of them live on campus. And so they haven't I won't say not, certainly not all, but a lot of them haven't realized what their needs might be, especially once they move off campus. That's when we start seeing a lot more needs pop up. And so I'm thinking about more targeted outreach to sophomores, particularly more of an overall awareness, not only of campus, but of the community, because now they're living out in the community. I feel like every single day I'm plugging our local food bank and I'm plugging local resources alongside our campus resources. And so it's kind of hard with on-campus students to share those resources up front because they don't they don't have a relationship to them. They don't know that they may need them. So sort of thinking more about sophomores off campus students is where my mind is right now.
Love that, Gina. And I think that's just a great example of thinking about how different student populations, including the years that they're in or whether they're on campus or off campus, can help us break down and get more specifically to the groups that may be hard to reach and may not have even thought about this as being a need to help them be sustainable and successful. Great. And I see a question there, kind of a practice exchange question from Karin about comms and marketing teams working with you. So if folks want to answer that one in the chat, that would be great. Shannon shares that reaching poverty impacted students, Pell eligible, first gen, whole needs within the whole campus, engaging the whole community. That's great. Thank you so much, Shannon. Rebecca says we're partnered with United Way of King County. So they do a lot of that work for us. So love that. So that has meant that they've worked less with marketing team. Okay, great. I think that, wherever there are partnerships, including with community-based partners that may be on your campus, fantastic. The interesting opportunity we're going to talk about is how the outreach can connect to the actual services. And so that may be a part of what's happening in the community and technical colleges partnered with United Way of King County. But for others, that may not be a resource yet. Joe says we don't regularly work with Campus Comms, sometimes on a special project like promoting one-time food drive, but no strategy or design work. Okay, that's helpful to understand that landscape. Okay, great. Let's go on to the next step, which is step 2. And we're going to talk about it broadly, but I'm going to put in the chat, as I'll keep doing, the part of the page on the toolkit document that you can reference. Meg says, I think busting the SNAP eligibility myth is an ongoing challenge and adjusting the message using USDA marketing. Kind of the long game. Love that. Really great insight there. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Kim, on to you. So an essential part of the enhanced outreach is really figuring out the best platform for communicating with your intended audience. And there's a few parts to this. So in the example that we just looked at, the messaging was sent via personal email in a customer relations management system, or we call it a CRM system, run by the communications department in partnership with the basic needs team. So this example that we just looked at, that was its platform, but it could also be adapted for text messaging or another kind of messaging platform. So the platform will help determine your messaging. And the other key thing that's really important to consider when you're figuring out which platforms to use is the ability to track and report on the outcomes of your messaging efforts. So that's an important thing to think about when you're considering your possible platforms. So in broad marketing, like posting flyers, we aren't really trying to track to see who saw that poster or flyer. But with enhanced strategies, we want to be able to track and actually know who's seeing the message and if they're acting on it. So here are some steps that will really help you identify the best platform for the intended audience and your reporting needs. So first of all, we have to know what's available. So it's important to talk to your IT department, IR, or if you have them, communication staff, to find out the platforms that are possible. So it's just that feasibility question. And second, you really have a lot of considerations on the capacities of those possible platforms at your campus. So what's possible in terms of reporting, including the outreach campaign data, and we're going to talk about the details on that. How do the messaging platforms connect with other tools like advising platforms like Navigate that some campuses are using, or ConXED, which will be in the community and technical college sector, or Starfish. So whatever you're using on campus to manage advising, is there like an integration opportunity for what the messaging might be? And another question is, can you send the messages directly, or do you have to work through another team? So that's a question. Basic needs teams may have access to messaging tools, but it's not a bad thing to work with communications teams if they're a full, collaboration partner. But there may be some limitations to that as well. So things to think through. And then finally, text is such a great tool to reach students. So you might be asking questions like, is two-way texting a possibility? Are there character limits that are going to keep you to really short messages? And I saw a question from Madeline about whether texting has an opt-in aspect. For those of you that are currently using texting with students, if you could just add in the chat, your thoughts on that and experiences that you have. So these are some considerations. I want you to go back to your worksheet notes and just jot down what you know about that step 2 of the platform choice. What's currently available? What are your questions around it? Who at your campus could help you figure that out? And anything else that you want to keep in mind as you kind of discover this landscape of platforms at your campus. And just inviting you all to add in the chat some of your comments and questions, as well as your individual thoughts and questions on your worksheet. Of the campuses that were in the pilot last year, if you'd like to share anything about the platforms you chose last year and kind of pros, cons, and how it worked, that would be great to hear. It's always good to hear from specific examples. I see a comment there from Kelly who says students are not reading emails. They're not opening them. I think video messaging on the screens around campus might help reach students. Add music and students are delivering the message. Great idea. So that would be an example of broad messaging and a good example. Are there any ways that there might be targeting to the hard to reach populations that could be added to that concept? Could a quick video message be used in some other way to especially reach those who are hard to reach? So that would be a question I'm posing. I don't have an answer to, but this is the land of experimentation. Kelly says, if having to choose between the CRM messages that can track data but are impersonal and not creative customizable versus other platforms that are more enhanced but can't be tracked, which is more important? Oh, fascinating. Anyone have thoughts on that or experiences? I have an opinion, but would love to hear your opinions. I'll throw in my thoughts, Kelly, on this question, but I am not the sole, it's not a like a written in stone answer because I think everyone has perspectives on this. My sense is a combination is the way to go, that your strategy could engage both. And I think the CRM messages, if possible, there might be ways to get some expertise on campus that could help uh, take the personalization to the next level. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. Great. Love the messages in the chat. Gina says at Western, we were limited on our direct outreach messages. We thought financial was going to work with us more than they were able to. Well, that sounds like it might be a common situation. She used an emailing tool called Bullseye that targeted work study students for SNAP. It was okay, and it is email, and not all students open email. I tried to write a more friendly email that they would read. Thanks, Gina. That's kind of figuring out the line on that, and experimentation is the way to go. Mike says, I think our most successful event so far this year was the DSHS mobile unit. Our campus policy is email first, followed by a text. There, I love that. Interesting, not limited to one channel, but using them in a combined way. We sent 2 texts, and on the day of, anecdotally, a lot of students said that day of text got them there. That's very helpful. I hope that folks who are considering text use really think about that combination that we hear there. Oh, and great. Love that. We came up with sending hard to reach students a care kit with resources, basic health products, and snacks. Fascinating. Thank you so much for that interesting approach. And then Shannon's got some thinking out loud, a variety of platforms that he describes. Each has its own set of protocols, passwords, locations, storage locations. Doesn't take long before I'm experiencing a bit of overload. Students express something similar. This is a good point. So really thinking through it as opposed to a shotgun approach across everything, figuring out strategically what makes the most sense to focus on. And hear that a bit with the social media being a big part of outreach at Western. So posts and stories with other campus departments and clubs. So in some ways, sharing through other campus departments and clubs is a sort of targeting, engaging them in the sharing. So love that. Really excellent observations and experiences. Thanks, everybody. All right, so let's go to the next slide. We're going to move on to the next step, which is step 3. And we're going to start by returning to that example because it really helps to be able to see a specific example. There are 3 questions for you to consider, and I'm going to ask you to add your answers to the chat or raise your hand and you can speak to them. So, how is the message personalized and relevant? How does this message language and format make it easy to read? And how do images and symbols affect the message? And we heard a little bit of that earlier, but just want to get you to come back to this example with fresh eyes and respond to these 3 questions. I'll give you a moment to reply. Anton's noticing that the name of the student is in the greeting, so it's personalized in that way. And it's relevant by saying real support with a bulleted list. Awesome. Other observations about this? Aha, Annie's noting, hey, mail merge. We've got a way to be able to make sure that these messages have people's name. I'll share that WASAC has been sending targeted messages around benefits access to Washington College Grant students. And we don't often do that. Students don't know who the Student Achievement Council is mostly. But we use their name and money for groceries in the email intro, and we got like a 70% open rate. Normally, this kind of email message from WASAC gets something like a 15% open rate. So personalized really makes a difference with the names. Okay, Hannah Mae's noting the emojis and different color of the call to action message breaks up the information. Great formatting observation. And Ray's noticing that the tone is set by the emojis. It's less formal. Love that. Rebecca says, the question is how to make these messages accessible to screen readers. Good thing we have communications professionals on our campuses who can help us figure out that accessibility question for screen readers. Bullets. Yep, bullets are so helpful, or those kind of points. David notes that the images are powerful. It's the first indicator for most students if they're going to continue to investigate if the message sparks their interest or not. Sometimes with questions, with images, they take a minute to download or you have to click to download. So that's a balance. I know in the WASAC campaign, we decided not to use images for that reason, but that is kind of something to figure out. Rachel notes the phrase, we know success isn't just about classes. And Meg's noticing the language of the students' success team. That's accessible. It's less clear what we do sometimes. Anton's noticing the format with small paragraphs, making small chunks. Okay, awesome. Love your responses, and that directly relates to step 3. So I'll just highlight that using names is important, and the relevance for particular populations that you're focusing on. In this case, you noted that it was parenting students and working students in particular. So using the language to really focus in on those populations is important based on your goals of who you're really, the student groups you're targeting. The relevance is going to look different for different student groups. So if you're really focusing in on student groups that are, say, veterans, you might look at this and make different choices, right? You all noticed that the language and format was simple and direct. I'll note that it leads with the benefit. So talking about real support or leading with that free grocery cards, or free money for groceries, that kind of thing first and up front really catches attention. And then everyone noticed the format of making it small chunks, bullets, bolding, short sentences, that kind of thing. The symbols and images you noted, and I just want to offer this tip. It's also in the toolkit that there is a free photo library by Complete College America, and the link is there. It is really cool because you can download a lot of these images, including the one that is on this example. Love your comments about emojis or symbols. It creates familiarity as well as that informality, makes it more fun. The other thing we don't see in this example, but I think builds trust, is if you can include the logo of your college. That makes it more credible because everyone's trying to figure out, is this a scam or not, when it comes to messaging. I know I do that when I'm looking at something that's supposedly from an entity. Is this a real or is this a scam? And so having the logo and the individual name of how they can reach you is helpful in making it more credible. Let's go to the next slide. And I want to note that all of this is summarized in this nice little cheat sheet. It is on the slide, but it's also on page 9. We've talked about all this now, but I want to ask you about your campus. What aspects of messaging for outreach are most challenging for your team? And who might help you in being able to design and test messaging? You can reply in the chat, or if someone would like to kind of raise your hand and unmute and speak, love to hear other voices other than mine.
Hi, I raised my hand, but I'm not sure if you saw it.
Go for it,
Um,
Jesse. Thanks.
my aspects of messaging that are most challenging is that we are switching over our texting platform and our calling platform, and I don't have access to the student groups that I create for them yet. So I can't text students, even though that is a really good outreach tool. Also, one of the reasons we're switching over is because each person had to be entered individually to the text to the message. So when we had it, I did utilize it, but it was a challenge. Um, and yeah, the biggest thing is just people opening emails. So figuring out how to make them as concise and clear as possible, utilizing that subject line. That's definitely been a learning curve for me because when I was in college, I just opened all my emails and did what they told me to. Um, I also think that getting some student input might be helpful for designing and testing effective messaging.
Love that. Jesse, this aspect of getting access to the tools and then making it be like feasible and realistic has been a common challenge, especially for texting. So I'd be curious to hear from others if you have any ideas on that. Or for Everett, in your case, Jesse, if you think that there might be people on campus who could help you troubleshoot that to make it more functional and possible to use texting now that you're switching over to this new tool. The other thing I want to say is that getting feedback from students on existing messages that you have or in designing messages is a super great idea. And I would add that getting feedback from students who are in your target student population that you're trying to reach is especially important. So if it's parenting students, what could some parenting students tell you about the messages that you think that you'd like to use? Annie says that Peninsula, she uses text for her students. There are rules about character limits and how many you can send out each day. So texting is the best use of communication, immediate response. And I'm curious, Annie, in that case, we talked a little bit earlier about responsiveness in text. Is a text just a nudge, or is there a two-way where there could be, response to a student's message? Curious how that works for you in the tool that you're using. Is it two-way, or is it just to push out messages? Two-way. Love it. Great job, Peninsula. She sends out the blurbs, gets fast replies. Awesome. Love it. Shannon is noting that information should result in concrete, actual stuff, materials, resources, no matter the exchange. So making sure that it's a meaningful exchange as a resource. Love that, Shannon. So making sure that it's the message, and it's not always usable for every student, but students and staff will get the word that connecting with basic needs teams means resources. Love it. Okay, so Annie's adding in on the two-way texting. Not campus-wide. Someday I hope we will expand and get new tools. We also use Target X. And then to answer Madeline's earlier question, it's an opt-in opportunity. Great. Anybody else want to share about challenges and testing their messages, or getting help for the message development? Okay. Excellent. I'm so glad we had that discussion there. Let's move on to our fourth step. And if we can go to the next slide. This is around timing and frequency. So when you send a message is as important as the content. So let me just ask, has anyone ever gotten an email from an organization that you care about, say, I don't know, Sierra Club or whatever, and missed it the first time? If that's true for you, give me a reaction or an emoji in the chat. If you've ever got an email but you missed it the first time. Yep. Has anyone ever finally gotten to reading a message after the third or fourth time they sent it from an organization? Okay, so on my mind is this organization called Ocean Conservancy. I care about this organization. My late mother used to donate to them. She loved the calendars they would send. So I've been paying more attention to them. I've gotten about 3 messages from them just this month. And I swear I'm definitely going to respond and donate. I plan on it. But I'm likely not going to get to this until I'm on vacation at the end of this month. That's when I have the time. So what's the concept here? When you send the message is important, and sending the message more than once can really help the target population. In my example, it was me, but in our situation here, students, it can help get it on their radar and make it easier to find when there's a moment to actually read it and potentially act. We noted that folks are stretched thin, and really, it's only when they need something and when they have space to actually tackle that inbox or address it, take a look at it, that they might act. I see Kelly saying 5 times before they're ready to connect. Sales 101. Love that. I wanted to note a recent report that came out from New Jersey. They are running an adult re-engagement campaign, trying to get adults who stepped out of college or training programs to step back in. And they said that it took an average of something like 28 messages before they got those students, those potential students, returning students, to act. That's kind of mind-blowing. to think it's that many times. But I thought, since that just came out, it was an interesting point. And I think we're more connected to our students than, a campaign trying to get disconnected former students back. But it's really important to be able to know that it takes more than one time. Marit says something that I think is so important. I'd feel so spammy. And we are all worried about seeming spammy because I can't think of anyone I know who likes spam. And it's also hard to determine what is spam. That makes it hard too. So let's talk about that for just a second. Because I'll give the example of, my own Ocean Conservancy example. It feels a little spammy, but let me tell you, when I'm going to be ready to go back to that, it's going to be easy to find in my inbox because there's more than one. Let's take a look at the next slide. And I want to share with you an example of a schedule for enhanced outreach. And I want you to look at it and notice three things. One is frequency. Another, as you look at it, is how the messaging is timed with other events. And then I'll also pay attention to the topics. So these are three questions that you're going to examine this to determine. And put in the chat what you notice in these three areas. Frequency, how the messages are connected to other events, and the topics. That came through in a weird way. I'm going to try putting that in the chat one more time. There. Okay, Anton's noticing that the frequencing is every other week. Marit says, I like the idea of sharing new resources and events with each email attempt, assuming it's email that you're using. In this one, notice in the platform column, the next to the last column, that it's showing that there's three ways that these messages are sent in this example. So it may be email, but it could also be text, and it could be Canvas or the learning management system. Odessa says weekly messages for constant soft touches. It builds upon each other with new resources every attempt using platforms students are currently using. Nice, love that. Great comments and insights. Canvas has been really helpful in reaching our workforce development students, says Marit. Excellent. Vote for Canvas. Love it. And Josephine says basic needs around holidays and finals. End of November is a big food moment, and finals are super busy and students may be stretched incredibly thin. University of Washington Tacoma puts out food for finals in the library for this reason. Love that comment in the noticing around how it connects. It's interesting around the holidays. Did you notice that even during breaks, they're sending out messages? Is that surprising to anyone? Is that something that you do? That's when students have time, says Meg. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So trying to time things when students actually have a chance to respond is very helpful. I'm doing that in my own example. Anton asks, do students have more time to look at these messages during breaks? Yeah, so we're hearing from campuses that yes. Demetria says, I like the frequency, but students are also receiving other messages from other departments, and information overload is real. It sure is. And that can contribute to students not paying attention to any messages. That is very interesting. What do you think about that, you all? I mean, that leads to the question of how are we coordinating on messaging across different teams and kind of connecting to that idea of how are basic needs focused campaigns coordinating with communications overall. Michaela, we don't often send out messages over breaks because we don't always know who's returning the next quarter. Fair point. Okay, great. Thank you for engaging on this. Any comments or questions about the topics that you see here? We noted that it varies, but anything else you're noticing about the topics and the timing of the topics? For example, October 28th through November 1st is a message around public benefits. Anything important going on in November around public benefits? Like, say, yes, Anton, it's open enrollment time. Of course, folks applying for Medicaid might have a broader time, but thinking about when key moments are for some of these particular benefits might be part of your annual schedule. And that's one of the advantages to planning a schedule out across the year. You can coordinate with other teams. You can coordinate with what kind of events you have on campus, and you can also coordinate with key things on in the public benefits realm. Another thing that I would note around public benefits is taxes. So you see there at the December 30th to Jan 4th that public benefits is being pushed again. Tax returns, tax credits, those are a great source of cash for students, but often taxes are not something that students are thinking about or want to think about. Most of us don't want to think about it, but being able to get a earned income tax credit or working families tax credit in the case of the Washington State students may be an incredible source of money for students who are financially uh, low income or strapped. So those are important resources that we want to make sure we're timing well in our communications. All right, let's go to the next slide. And just pointing out in the toolkit, page 9 and 10, is some timing and frequency considerations. Just like you said, how do we coordinate across the campus and in terms of when things are going out to not overload people and also connecting with key dates and resource dates. And another kind of best practice is really don't wait, start early. Beginning the first week of the term is really important. You'd notice that on the example we shared, Tuesday was the day all the messages went out. That middle of the week time is the best time. And we talked about, if possible, include term breaks. And the frequency that we saw, both from the research base and from some examples in the pilot, was that every other week is a great way to go. Great. The other thing I want to emphasize here, because we've talked about both an example from messaging in email message and an example on an annual schedule for timing and frequency, is I want to emphasize that copying examples is a great place to start as you think about your own plan. You can always adapt, but it helps to have a starting point. So the examples that we've shared in the toolkit, use them, copy them. In the pilot, that's what we did. We copied each other's examples as a starting point, and then everybody kind of adapted them along the way. So make sure that you are using these as a starting point. All right, I have great news. It's time for a break. When we come back, and let's go to the next slide, and click one more time. So take a stretch break now. Let's let's take 5 minutes, and we're going to be on the home stretch soon. Click one more time. When we come back, we're going to talk about this challenging question of how do we know the impact of our outreach? We're going to dive into a little more on campus planning with some small group time to discuss that. And then we'll wrap up with some support that we have planned and would love to hear your thoughts about what would be helpful. So take a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 11:05 and we will be on the third and final part of our training today. So see you in 5 minutes. So we're going to take a little bit of an extra time this morning to talk about the fifth and last step, which is analyzing our outreach campaign outcomes. And we're going to center on two questions. One is, how do we know if our outreach efforts are successful? And number two is, how do we know who we're reaching? We talked about particular populations that are furthest from success and stability on the basic needs front. We need to know who we're reaching and who we're not reaching so that we can adapt our strategies. So these are really critical questions, and we have some tools when we used enhanced outreach approaches that help us know if we're reaching people and which particular groups we're reaching. I'm going to describe some of the ways, the data that we can gather to help us understand and measure these metrics on impact. So you see it here on the slide, and you can also see it in the page 11 and 12 in the toolkit that I've put into the chat. So one is, if we're sending out digital messages, we can find out the delivery rates. Because we know sometimes messages we send bounce if they're email or if they're a cell phone for a text message campaign, they might bounce. So it's important to know the delivery rate. We also want to know the open rate. So what percentage of students who got the message actually opened it and viewed it? We have the ability to find out a reply rate if there is a text that's two-way, for example. We also, I heard that message earlier about, oh, I don't want to be spammy. Oh my gosh. We do have ways that in all of these digital communications tools that students can opt out or unsubscribe. And so understanding the rate of opting out or unsubscribing is helpful because if we don't want, no one wants to annoy students. We want to give them the ability to opt out. Finally, an important metric here is the click-through rate, or CTR. This is the percentage of students who click on a link that we've put into the message. So examples of that include, in last year's pilot, the link to Washington Connection to apply for benefits. So we were actually where they're able to gather data on who clicked on that. Another example of a link that you could embed is a link to a form to make an appointment with a basic needs navigator or other staff. So those are actual actions that students can take from the message if you embed them, and you can find out how commonly that happens. So all of this information can help identify which students may not be accessing or engaging with your messages. And that's really important for those who are traditionally hard to reach or who may be experiencing basic needs insecurity at disproportionate levels. These metrics can reveal also who takes action on what you're nudging them about in your messages, such as clicking on a link. And finally, this would be kind of like pie in the sky, but if you know the student groups that are engaging and those that aren't, it really you could even find out how does those who received the messages and opened it, how does that relate to the services they got. Like, did they come in and make an appointment at the Basic Needs Center or meet with a staff person? Is it possible to know, did they come to an event that you were prompting on? So, did they take real world action? If you have that data, you can correlate it to who actually got the message, and that helps you know if you're being effective. Finally, I just want to say that these are the metrics that can help you know where you've got gaps. And with those gaps, you can inform and shape ways that you change and improve your messaging campaign and your timing. So it's important to keep changing and improving our approaches in these campaigns. These are the metrics that help us know how to change them. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. We are going to explore 3 steps in the analysis process, and you're going to have some hands-on time to check out a new tool that Ed Northwest took the lead on developing. So we just talked about the outreach campaign metrics: delivery rate, open rate, click-through rate on any links, and other things like, say, unsubscribe rates. This information should be available at the student level, as well as kind of overall what your rates were for each round of your outreach campaign, each message, say, every other week. Who has that data? So it might be that you're controlling it and you have that data. So that's convenient. So you may already have that as you have access to the outreach platform. The other possibility is that your communications team on campus has that data and that you would be partnering with them to be able to get it from them because they're the ones that run the platform. So a potential partner to get the outreach campaign data, which is the first step, is to partner with your communications team. Number 2, this is the next important step. We want to know about the engagement for particular groups so we can find out how effective the messages were in a group-focused way. So first thing is you have to determine what are the student groups of interest. So we've talked about examples of parenting students. Another group might be veterans, might be those who are eligible for financial aid, might be first-generation students. These are knowable things about your current enrolled students. And if you have particular groups that you know are really important to reach with basic needs resources, you would identify those. Another example is you might want to find out about students in particular programs, say program of study or a support program. So identifying which student groups you want to know about is the first thing. And it has to be a status or characteristic that your campus collects at the student level to be able to do this. So, some things we'd like to know, but the campus may not collect it. And in that case, it would be a little harder to analyze. But this will give us a starting point. What would be important then is to be able to work with your institutional effectiveness or research office to both confirm the list you want early on and make sure that they have the ability to work with you to match up your student list with their demographics or characteristics. Many of you are already doing this for students served in particular programs or in other work that you're doing. So this would be a similar kind of process. I think I'm going to bring one more possible matching that you could do that would help you understand your impact beyond demographics or program characteristics, that kind of thing. You could consider this other area to match your student level data from the campaign, and that's the student use of the Basic Needs Office. So if your basic needs team has information at the student level of who is say, visiting a basic needs center or who is making appointments, then you would be able to find out of the students outreach to how many actually made an appointment with a navigator or visited the resource center. So that's a possibility. You could actually find that out if you have the data from your basic needs team. So again, this might be a more advanced level of determining effectiveness, but it could be very helpful and something to work with. My hope is to be able to kind of plant the seed that is possible. All right, so this is the big picture of the process for analyzing outcomes. What we're going to do next is look at a tool that you can use for this. So let's go to the next slide. And go ahead and click through. Whoops. I'm sorry. Before we get to the tool, there is one more step I wanted to describe. Sorry about that. The third step, which is once you've identified the groups, you've gathered the data, it's this third step of analyzing and identifying which students are and aren't being reached. So in this third step, I'm going to describe how it works with a simple example, and then we'll go to the tool that I mentioned earlier. So using the match data, we're going to find out for each group of interest of the total group who received messages, what's the percentage of the group of interest that were delivered a message, and the percent who opened the message. So that really gives us an opportunity to see trends across particular groups and where there might be low open rates for particular student groups. So let's look at the example you see right there in the bottom of this slide. So in this particular campaign, the student group targets were parenting students and veteran students. And so for the parenting students represented, in this analysis, they found that the parenting students were 22% of all students who received the message, but their open rate was only 10% of the total. In the case of veteran students, even more concerning, 13%, they were represented 13% of all the students in the messaging campaign, but none of them opened the message. So that's really a red flag there. And so when we think about gaps, and click one more time, Kim, we see that parenting students have a 12 percentage point gap in opening the message, and veterans have a 13 percentage point gap. In fact, they're particularly concerning because they didn't engage at all. So that really gives the opportunity in this example to assess the messaging you used, including the language, the visuals, the timing, even the platform used, and be able to see how you could better reach these student groups of particular interest. Great. So this is the concept, and now we're going to talk about a tool, but I want to just pause here for a moment and see if there are any clarification questions about what this analysis might look like. And I want to emphasize that last year in the pilot, this was not a step we got to. We talked about it a bit among the colleges, but most institutions were not really ready yet for this step. So it is an analysis by population that is a more advanced step, but it's really important and creates such important insights to help us make adaptations to the approaches. Demetra says it's a wonderful idea to have a basic needs office, but many of us have basic needs person that does multiple things. Well, that's very true, Demetra. There are different models. So it may be that that aspect of being able to gather data on who is receiving help may be difficult if it's decentralized across many staff and many units and kind of that different approach to providing support. So good point. And it may be that that's not a fit for some campuses. So really understand that. But there might be other ways to consider how students or metrics on how students are actually taking action on the campaign. And an example of that might be, what do students do if they're requesting help? And is there a way to be able to measure that? Kelly said, I think finding time for this kind of follow-up, reflection, and analysis is really challenging. Whoa, that is so true, Kelly. And I think that that represents an example of why a lot of the pilots from last year didn't get to this step. So just recognizing that reality and knowing that these are learned skills. The other thing that I think about is in your campus, are there others who do this kind of work? For example, is this kind of work happening with guided pathways to try to understand in disaggregated student groups what the outcomes look like? Are there ways to tie this analysis or make it easier for those who are running these campaigns? So who are the people who might already have the ability to do this kind of analysis? Or is there a time of the year when this kind of analysis might make sense? So recognizing the challenges on both of these fronts, and I think it looks different everywhere. But let's kind of keep our minds open to what's possible and also what could be learned from it. All right. So, what we're going to do next, let's go to the next slide, are three things. We're going to look at this new tool called the Impact Analysis Tool. And I am going to attempt to screen share and give us a chance to look at it. So I want to say, first of all, prefacing this, that just recognizing it is overwhelming sometimes to think about analysis, including calculations and evaluating, but we don't want to get paralyzed and think, oh, that's not something any of us could do. This tool is intended to make this easier for everyone. The data gathering, yes, that can be challenging also, but the tool is intended to provide a template of what that would make the whole process easier. So we're going to do a brief tour with screen share, and then I'm going to break you into small groups where you get a chance to do some hands-on exploration of that tool. And then we'll come back after we've done all that and discuss it. How might it work? What will it look like for you? Is this feasible? All of those kinds of things. So I'm going to put in the chat where you can find this tool. And I want to take a moment for folks to be able to access it before we advance. So first, you can find it in the toolkit on page 12. It is a link. You can also find it on the WASAC webpage, but you will have to download it. And then the third opportunity to download this tool is from Google Sheets. And I uploaded it into Google Sheets, so you can get it there. You could just look at it, or you could download it onto your local computer. And for those who may not be able to stick around for this part, I just want to say It's all recorded, no worries. Okay, so let me get set up to do some screen sharing, and then I'm going to do that together with Kim. All right, so brief tour of this tool. Could you give me a reaction or emoji if you've been successful in downloading or even just opening the impact analysis tool? Oh, I love it. Okay, great. Thank you all. All right, here we go. I'm going to share screen. Here's your tour. So first tab really tells you a little bit about what is this tool? How are we going to use it? What's the purpose? We're going to go to the second tab down here, impact analysis, and we're going to be at the top of the Excel sheet. So the first thing I want to note is that this is student level data. So students don't have to be actually named. It could be by number, however you want to do it. But we would need student level data to use this template. In this example, which is going to show you how this works, we've just used numbers. All right, so the first bit of data to collect, our step one, is to gather the data from the campaign for outreach. So we talked about the metrics: delivered message, opened message, clicked on the hyperlink or click-through rate, and unsubscribe, meaning they didn't like it. They don't want to get these messages. And so your platform should be able to tell you, say you're using an email platform, it should be able to tell you each of these, and then per student, you could see that information. So this is already filled in for these hypothetical students. So you can see what that would look like. So that is the purple section of this. I'm going to take us next to the second step, which is around connecting to your institutional research or institutional effectiveness team for these same students. And you wanted to gather over here in the gray the student level demographic information. So here's the students identified by number that you sent the messages to. And you've identified that these are the categories across the top, these columns. These are the particular interest student groups that you want to know how they engage. So in this case, Pell Grant recipient, parenting student status, veteran status, part-time student, full-time student. In your case, you may say, oh, no, not parenting student status. It turns out we don't collect that. So you could erase that column. But for each of these columns, your institutional research or effectiveness staff would add what data is known about this particular student that you sent the message to in each of these. So there's the data. So those are the two key parts that'll help you know how particular groups are engaging with your messages. All right. I talked about a pie in the sky. Like, it'd be really great to know if they not only received it, but then they took action on it. So that's where this blue center section is, columns G and H. And that's data that you could get on basic needs engagement. Maybe it's the basic needs office, or maybe there's some other kind of engagement. So in this example, did they make an appointment? And if it were possible to know, did they apply for public benefits? So in this particular example, this data was available and that information is put down here. So this is the step around gathering the data. And again, the key would be gathering the data on how students engaged with the campaign and what their demographics and characteristics are that you are targeting and particularly wanting to know how you're reaching those students. All right, that's the top part. I am going down to the second part, and this is the part where it's ready-made for you for the analysis. I'm going to describe how this works, and then you'll have a chance to do some hands-on in small groups to play with this a little bit. So notice up here we did have student level information in each of these areas. So here's the impact analysis in this template that's already filled out, it's already calculated. So the first question is around open rates. How did students in particular groups open this message? Because if they don't open it, forget the rest. So overall, the campaign had a 92% delivery rate and a 30% open rate. That's actually not bad for an email campaign. So we know that 92% overall of students received the message, and of those 92%, only 30% opened it. And then for each of these categories, we're able to see the same thing. So in the case of Pell Grant recipients, the delivery rate was smaller. And then of that, the open rate was only 30%. So here's the analysis. 59% of your students who are Pell Grant recipients received the message, but only 30% opened it. Parenting students, 22% who received it, the message, but only 10% opened it. And so we have a gap of those who received it but didn't open it. And it shows you that gap for each of these categories of these student groups of interest. And you can see what that gap looks like here over in the analysis. This template shows that for the open rate. It also shows it for clicking the hyperlink, which is sometimes, very important if you're prompting them to, say, apply for public benefits or click a link to be able to make an appointment. So this auto, calculates for you what the percentages were so that you don't have to do that math yourself. Finally, a lot of us were concerned about unsubscribe, like am I spamming my students? So this shows the unsubscribed rate and what that looks like per student group. The last two sections are, again, if you were able to gather data on who made an appointment with a basic needs office or if they applied for benefits, pie in the sky areas. But if you had that data, you could actually find out what was the impact, what percentage of students in each of these groups actually followed through with that action.